So, good morning and welcome to the 2020 Star Wars Reads for the great city of Augusta, Georgia. I want to thank our host, the Augusta-Richmond County Public Library, and the director, Miss Michelle Fashion, for allowing the public library to serve as the host site for Star Wars Reads in Augusta since 2011. Good morning again to all my young Padawans. Now!
Yay!
There was a voice in the background saying, "We can't see you." I was like, "Is that Emperor Palpatine?" All right. So, good morning again to all of my young Padawans viewing this morning, as well as the grizzled veterans of the Rebel Alliance. My name is Corey Rogers, Jedi Knight and friend of Captain Solo. I have taken time away from trying to destroy the Empire to do a segment this morning for our 2020 Star Wars Virtual Reads Day, and I'm joined by a person that I can only describe as a literary Jedi master. I am joined by the super accomplished New York Times bestselling author, Justina Ireland. Justina, how you doing?
Hello, I'm excellent. How are you?
I'm doing good. I tell you, I'm on sort of like this natural high this morning because I've been vibing with you before we went live, and we have all of these things in common. So I'm like, man, how cool is this person? and I get to interview her this morning. I've been so excited. You know, my love of Star Wars, and anytime I get a chance to talk to someone who is a part of the Star Wars universe, it always sort of gets me going and everything. And Justina, before we get into a little bit of your background, just to let you know, and just to let the audience know, we've been doing Star Wars Reads now since 2011. And when we started it, it was sort of the perfect marriage between our love for sci-fi and fantasy, merging with our love for reading and passing that love of reading on to the younger generation. So we're just excited that every year it keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now, I hate the fact that this year you're on Coruscant and I'm on Alderaan. So we're in these two. Yeah, we're in these.
I have really bad news about your planet.
well,
you're gonna want to plan like a break.
But Justine, here's the thing, we're going to get to a test of courage in a moment. But in a test of courage, there's still an Alderaan.
Yes.
It's still there. So for the purposes of this interview, we're good. However, when you come back and you've written that next novel that takes place right before New Hope, that's when I'm going to take a shuttle to Dantooine. I'm going to Dantooine, okay? A brother got to go. Okay. So, Justina, I want to talk a little bit about some of your earlier works, and then we're going to transition into the work that you've been doing with Star Wars and Lucasfilm. But as a history professor and as a public historian here in Augusta for the past 20 years, there's one thing that I always take with me into the classroom.
I didn't want to do it,
and that is never assume that the audience that I'm speaking to knows everything. Some things you just want to kind of lay out yourself. So what I would like to do, Justina, is step back for a moment, and I would like for you to introduce yourself to our audience this morning. Tell us a little bit about the great New York Times best-selling author, historian. How cool is that? She's a historian, Justina Ireland. Talk to us a little bit, Justina. Go for it.
So, my name is Justina Ireland. I am the author of, oh wait, look, I have them right here. Dread Nation, which is New York Times bestseller, which takes place when the zombie apocalypse starts at the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's set in the world 17 years later. So it's not a zombie survival story. It's kind of like after the zombies have kind of ruined everything, how do we survive story. And it follows Jane McKean, who is a Black girl who's been sent to a training school to learn how to put down the dead and basically take care of her betters, which are rich white women. Mm-hmm. And then there's the sequel to it, Deathless Divide, which just follows Jane and her friend Catherine after their adventures in the book. So if you're going to read them in order. Otherwise, you'll get minor spoilers. I'm also super, super excited to be writing Star Wars. My first Star Wars book was Lando's Luck. It takes place prior to the events of Solo, when Lando and L3 still have the Millennium Falcon. And it was a really fun book to write. It features a sassy space princess named Renetta, who has kind of, convinces Lando to do the better thing when he gets involved in some of the events that are going on her planet. The next book, Star Wars book I wrote was Spark of the Resistance. This is the lead-in to Rise of Skywalker, and it follows all of our favorites, Rose, Rey, Poe, and some new characters, as they try to piece together the Resistance after the events of The Last Jedi. Nice. So it's kind of a dark time for the Resistance. Things are not going their way, and they get a call on the edge of space, and they have to go help people, because even though they have their own problems, part of being the Resistance is you try to do the good whenever possible. And my next Star Wars book comes out in January, and you can pre-order it now, and it is A Test of Courage, and it takes place well before the events of Phantom Menace and during the age of the Republic that we're calling the High Republic. So it's sort of like if you think ancient Greece or ancient Rome or King Arthur and Camelot. It's like this golden era of the Republic, before the Empire, before the First Order, before all that nonsense, and post Sith, right? So the Jedi have already defeated the Sith. And it's kind of just the Jedi are in that heyday. They're great. They're heroes. They're not sort of the kind of that we see them in Phantom Menace. They're making bad decisions. And so it's really just a fun time to write. And that follows the main character is Vernestra Rowe, and she's a Miri Allen. And she became a Jedi Knight at the age of 15, and now she's 16. She just turned 16, and she's on her very first mission as a Jedi. So it's kind of for her dealing with what it's like to be a really young Jedi, because at 16, most Jedi are still Padawans. They're not knights yet.
That's true.
Yeah, so that's me. I write a lot of books. I like books. I like reading books. Books.
What I find very impressive, Justina, is just the wide range you just displayed now. So going from the Dread Nation books and then sort of moving over to the Star Wars books, that shows sort of a wide range and your effectiveness as a writer. And I think that is really great. We're going to get into the Star Wars books sort of one by one. But before we do that, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, biographically speaking. Where are you from? What are some of the things that has sort of brought you to this point today?
Yeah, so I'm originally from California. I was born and raised there. When I was 19, I realized that college is expensive, and so I joined the Army. I was in the Army for about 4 years before I joined a program called Green to Gold, which let enlisted soldiers go to school on fully paid, in addition to your Army college fund and that, and come back as an officer. So I did that. I went to school in Savannah in Armstrong Atlantic State University, which is now Georgia Southern.
I saw that look.
I know. I can't help it. My face just does that. And I graduated with a BA in history. Okay. I then went and did my military time. Towards the end of my military time, I got married when I was in the Army, and then I had my daughter and decided I was done with military stuff, and it was time to do other things. And when I had my daughter, that's when I decided maybe book writing was the thing I wanted to do. So that's how I got into writing. After my first couple books came out, way back in 2013, I realized maybe I wasn't a very good writer. Maybe I could be a better writer. So I went back to Hamline University and got an MFA in creative writing.
Oh, nice. So that is great. And I just, I think that being here in Augusta, Georgia, with one of the major military installations, Fort Gordon, I noticed that the people that I went to school with growing up from Fort Gordon and the people that I meet from the fort, one of the qualities that they often bring, and I think that this is probably something that connects you with these individuals, is that when you travel a lot, when you move around a lot, it gives you a wider sense of the world that's out there. And so I noticed that many of the veterans and many of the active military that I meet, they are often very well rounded. Number one, they're very well read. Number two, and they just have sort of a wider sense of the world, the community. And I guess for you, that could also inform a lot of your subject matter when you're writing.
Most definitely. It's really hard to write inside a cave, right? Because you like all you can see is what's in front of you. I love traveling. When I joined the army, I was stationed in Arizona, I was stationed in Texas, and you might think that those places aren't very different, but they're extremely different. Every community has its own, sort of in culture, and when you talk about food, the things that people get excited about, it's like it's very different. And I think that does help when you're writing, especially somewhere in the Star Wars galaxy, where basically every planet is a completely separate, different culture. It's nice to be able to envision like how do those people come together. Plus, books are about relationships. Books are about how people interact with one another, how characters, look at somebody else's flaws and either judge or look past them, and how they look at their own flaws and realize it's stopping them from getting to what they want or what they need. And so like it's really important to be able to understand how relationships work and have worked with other people. That's one of the things that's great about the military is like teamwork is very important from like the beginning. Like the first day you're at basic training, you realize if you screw up, it's not just you who's going to be punished. Everybody else in your platoon is also
Everybody.
going to be punished.
Yeah.
And you get this idea very quickly, like we have to work together. Otherwise, we're all going to end up just sad and tired on our faces in the front running rest position. So so I think it's really helpful. This is why you also see a lot of veterans become writers later on, because you have all these experiences and you have all this you're seeing humanity. I mean, especially when you go to, if you're deployed, you're seeing humanity at its best and its worst, and so it gives you a different perspective into that storytelling aperture, into that a way into that story. And so yeah, so I do think it's I like I said, like I do really think books are amazing, but I also think at some point you have to put down the book and go out and get real world experiences. It's a little harder right now because quarantine and pandemic, but definitely traveling is always one of the things I recommend. I just last summer, before everything kicked off, I spent a month in Scotland, because I was just like, I need to, once my kid was out of school, I was like, let's just go stay in Scotland. And being able to just like live in a place, like for, instead of just like coming in and visiting as a tourist, but being able to like live there as somebody who would live in the city, it's a completely different perspective. It was really awesome. So yeah.
That's great. Justina, before we do a deep dive into the books, I was just, it just made me so happy and excited when I was, just talking with you briefly before we went live, and you mentioned that you were a history major. I mean, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Look,
I mean, talking about a kindred spirit. I mean, Star Wars should have been enough. That should have been enough of a connection. But the fact that you majored in history, it's just mind blowing. It's just really mind blowing. So, well, let me ask you just briefly, what kind of, because people often ask me this question, what gravitated you towards the study and the pursuit of history?
yeah. So it is actually a funny story. So when I was in high school, back in the dark ages before the internet, um,
I can relate.
yeah,
I can relate.
when dial-up was like a really cutting edge thing, you're like, oh my
Yeah.
god.
Yeah.
We had to take in our junior year of high school. We had to take an American history class, and I've always loved American history more than like European history or British history. It's just there's something about American history that just feels kind of scrappy,
Mm.
that I've always been attracted to. And so we took our American history, and then my senior year, they were offering an AP American history. And for those of you who are not familiar with the AP program, the idea behind the AP program is you take this class. It's an advanced placement class, right? And then when you come out of the class, you're supposed to come out with college credits. You can test out of college prerequisites or requisites, like usually your first couple American histories or something. And so it's also an extra grade point average in your GPA, which if you're like a nerd and you're going to a good school, then you want. But I was not a nerd, and was not going to a good school. I had like a very unfortunate freshman and sophomore year of high school. So like my GPA was like, let's get out of here. And let's just make it through. And so my teacher was like, you should take this class. We need a certain amount of people to take this class. And I was like, well, why would I take the class? And he's like, I've already taken American history with you. And he's like, well, it's going to be different. And I was like, okay, fine. I signed up for the class because I kind of like the teacher, even though he's kind of a jerk. And it was a class, I figured it would be an easy A. And it was not an easy A, because what happened was the coursework was completely different than what we had done the year before. We were using the same book. We were doing the same projects. And it was just all very different. And I went up to my teacher and I was like, why is this so much different than last year? It's the same book, but we're like learning completely different new things that we didn't learn last year. Because I had my notes from the year before, because I was that kind of that kid. And he was like, because it's all bullshit. He's like, you can tell whatever story you want about history. He's like, I can give you 3 facts, and I can tell you 3 different reasons these facts mean this, or 3 different reasons these facts mean that. And I was so utterly entranced by that idea that you could change the narrative by just understanding what the baseline facts were and making your own conclusions. And so that made me love history, because I'd always loved stories. I was always a big reader. I loved fiction, loved science fiction and fantasy and all those things, and horror. But I never had seen that history to me is always like dates and dead dudes. And once I realized that, especially when I went to my bachelor's, where you could pick your classes and you can figure out what you wanted to major in, I was always, even to this day, like people are like, why do you always work history into your speculative fiction? I'm like, because it is the original speculative fiction.
Exactly.
It's just real. And it also makes your fiction feel real, because people know the baseline facts. And then when you present them to them in a new way, they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And so it feels like a revelation, even though you're just saying the same things history has said over and over again. So yeah, so like I do love history. I do, like, I'm the person who like starts watching the thing on, like, well, the History Channel used to have history.
Oh, Justina, tell me about it.
All right. And now it's like, ghosts? Why are there ghosts on the History Channel? I mean, I guess they're history. But yeah, I used to be that person who would watch it, or like whatever's going on, and then like, that's not true. Wait, what are they saying? And like fact check it, which makes my husband crazy. But no, I do love history. I still, even to this day, all my, like, I have a book I'm working on right now, and it takes place in an alternate 1930s, dealing with the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Dust Bowl, but from a Black perspective, and instead of, because we did have Civilian Conservation Corps had like Black Civilian Conservation Corps, a smaller groups that went out and did stuff. And so like, I'm like, oh my God, I've never heard about this, and that's the time when you had, people going through and doing the last of the slave narratives, or doing the oral history projects and stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff that goes on in the 30s, and people kind of skim over it because they're like, well, the Great Depression. I was like, but there's other stuff.
Exactly.
There's so much stuff. So yeah, I love history.
That's great. And I think you hit on a very key element that sort of ties in any author or any person who is, trying to capture the attention of a group. And that is telling sort of interesting stories, hearing interesting stories, listening to people tell history, oral accounts, for example. I think, Justina, that the baby boomers and others who took history courses, they learned those facts and dates, and that was about it.
Yeah.
And that was about it. But for us, it's a little bit deeper. And, for me, it's always been sitting down with that 85-year-old World War II veteran and listening to his or her story, and then using that as information going forward to craft a narrative about what was that experience like for a Black Navy seaman in the Pacific during World War II, or a member of the 761st Tank Battalion in the Atlantic during World War II. And so, yeah, history is just so fascinating to me, and it's so many different angles and ways you can take it. So it's really nice. It's really nice to hear that. Justina, let me ask you, and we can always come back to history. As a matter of fact, we may just have to talk offline about that, because I'll sit here and take up all your time about history, and then everyone at the library is gonna be like, well, why did you spend 45 minutes on history and 2.5 minutes on Star Wars and everything? That don't make sense in everything. Especially I got on my Mandalorian shirt today. So I have to, I got to represent. But let me ask you, Justina, how did you kind of transition into the Star Wars world? How did you get your foot in the door with Star Wars, Lucasfilm, and just go a little bit deeper into the first two books, and maybe which one is your favorite out of Lando's Luck and Spark of the Resistance?
Yeah, so this is the question I get all the time, is like, how do I write Star Wars? And the answer is the answer nobody wants to hear, which is write your own books first. Because really, they like to come through, find people who are already kind of doing well on their own before they ask you to hand over something important like a Star Wars story. So I had just written Dread Nation. Dread Nation was about to come out. It was like a couple months before Dread Nation came out. And before a book even comes out, you have advanced readers copies. So publishers send out basically unfinished versions of a book on this really crappy paper that basically tears as soon as you turn the page. And they're like, love this book. Tell your friends about how great this book is. And for Dread Nation, people actually really loved the book. And I was getting a lot of buzz. And my agent was contacted, because I have a literary agent, by Jen Heddle, who is the executive editor, I think, at Lucasfilm Disney Press. And so on the publishing side, the Star Wars books are broken up in a couple different ways. All of the young adult and middle grade and kids books are Lucasfilm Press, but Lucasfilm Press is also Disney Press. And so on the adult side, you have Del Rey, which is another publisher who publishes the adult Star Wars books. And then you have, for comics, you have the Marvel, which also Disney already owns it. So it's kind of like it's like a handshake to their friends. And then they have IDW has the kids comics. So you have a different, and then if there's special interest books, there's publishers like DK and Abrams and those places. And Titan in the UK does short fiction. So there's all these different companies that sometimes have licenses, but for the young adult and middle grade books, they're done in-house with Disney and Lucasfilm Press. And so I got this email and they're like, oh, they want to know if you would be interested in writing a Star Wars book in the future. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, that's cool. And I was trying to be cool. I was like, yeah, what else? And all, but I was like, and literally 2 weeks later, I got an email from my agent. They're like, okay, great. They want to know if you can write one now. And I was like,
wow.
Okay. And they're like, yeah, it would be Lando. And I was like, oh, how was other stuff? I had another book due. I had other things I was working on. At that time, I was still working full time. Now I'm a full time author, but at that time, I used to work for the Department of the Navy. So I was still working for the government, and I was kind of just for me, writing was still that second job, that dream I wanted to have, but that wasn't. So I was like, sure, I guess maybe. And then my agent came back and was like, it's going to be Lando. And I was like, yes. And that's how I ended up writing Lando's Luck. Yeah. It was titled something else before, and I would always call this the thing it was before. And of the two, I would say Lando's Luck is probably my favorite book, because it's the first Star Wars book I wrote, but it's also the book that I didn't have to necessarily bookend it between a bunch of other things. So if you read Spark of the Resistance, it plays into Rebecca Roanhorse's Poe Dameron book, and it plays into a Marvel comic series. So when you're kind of threading that needle, it's a little more difficult than if you're just writing a book that's going to back into a movie at the end. So it's writing IP is a lot like history. It takes a lot of research. You have to go back and double check your notes. You do the editor will say well, this isn't, you can't use this because this is contradicts something else. And so you have all those different checks and balances. which is not unlike defending a thesis.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
like, there are a lot of that's one of the things that, people always ask. They're like, it's like writing for Star Wars. And I was like, well, it's like writing any other like sort of like kind of serious thing. Like if you've written like an academic paper and you know that there are expectations and there are standards, it's sort of like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I do think Lando's Luck. I still have a special place in my heart for it.
Well, I noticed how you kind of perked up. You kind of got a little giddy when you found out it was going to be centered around Lando Calrissian. And I think that for a lot of us that grew up with the original trilogy as our first, introduction to the Star Wars universe, having the introduction of Billy D. Williams as Lando, and then now Donald Glover coming back as Lando, the younger Lando, I think that's exciting for multiple generations and things of that nature. What what was sort of your favorite character between Spark of the Resistance and Lando's Luck? Outside of Lando, what was another character that you really enjoyed working on?
One of the characters I really loved in Spark of the Resistance is a scientist named Glenna Kip, and you don't know what kind of race or species she is. You just know that she's lived a really long time, and she's kind of one of those characters that's seems a little morally gray. She starts out at the beginning of the book seeming to help the First Order, and by the end of the book you realize that she's actually working on behalf of the Resistance, and that she has a past where she used to work with the Empire because she's really long lived. And I liked really exploring her as a character because we have so many of these really long lived characters in the galaxy. I mean, we have Yoda and we have Maz Kanata, and a bunch of others who I'm blanking on right now. But like, you have to wonder, like, if you have this long view of history, right? If you've lived through the entire canon, like, you're going to have a much different perspective on the galaxy and things happening than somebody who's a human who has a very like short, finite lifespan compared to like a Yoda's raise. So yeah, so like that was one of the things I really enjoyed with her, because she's also a scientist. So she's like very like precise and like kind of academic in her approach to things. Whereas you have, like Poe, who is very much like, yeah, like gung-ho about things, and Rose, who's like very like gentle and caring and nurturing. And then Rey, who's like a little bit like, I'm confused. Things are complicated on Jakku.
I don't know what's going on.
She's like, look, I had sand and like some like scavenging for like a good number of my life, and now all of a sudden all this is happening. Which, I mean, like, God bless her. But yeah, so like I do think that is like one of the things that is really fun about writing, because it's much easier to introduce these smaller secondary characters in a book than it is in a movie, because like it's like we all have had that moment when we watched a movie, not necessarily Star Wars, but we watched a movie and like a secondary character comes on screen and then like leaves, and you're like, what is that? And all I can think of is the end of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, when Pee-wee's the bellhop and he's like, paging Mr. Herman. Mr. Herman, like, why is this? Why? Like, like it's a movie within a movie, and that's a joke. But like sometimes when you're watching a movie, you're like, why is this character, like, why are we looking at this character for like 30 seconds? And then of course the character comes back later because they're an assassin or something like that. But like, it's, and with a book, you can bring in characters, and maybe the character is just like a character who appears in your book, but another author might read your book and say, oh, I really like that character, and bring that character in and do more with them. So that's one of the cool things about like writing in the Star Wars galaxy.
That's cool. Justina, I thought it was really neat that you decided to focus the energy on a scientist, because I think for all too often in the Star Wars universe, there are certain professions that are kind of the focal point of the universe. Warrior, general, Jedi Knight. Just in a kid. But I think we're gonna come back to this. So I don't want us to get into this just yet. But I think with just what you described in your book, I think Rogue One also does that as well, where you look at you have different professions that you often don't highlight, and that they're highlighted through that movie. I was thinking, Justina, and I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm pitching it to the right person, but have we ever had Jocasta Nu might be the closest one, but I'm thinking like with the protagonist was a historian.
Dr. Afra is an archaeologist, right? Like
that's true. That's true.
Her true trade. So I mean, it's kind of close. But yeah, I mean, so here's the fun thing, right? Like most of the Star Wars like movies and television shows take place during like conflict, and it's really hard to have like a regular job like when the galaxy's at war, right? Like if your university's been shut down and your funding's been pulled because like everything's being scripted, then it's it's a little difficult. But yeah, no, I have such a deep place in my heart for like all of the non-Jedi regular Joes just living their life. Like I love Rogue One. It's probably my favorite Star Wars movie, which makes my husband want to cry. But
well, we're gonna get it.
It feels real. It feels lived in. It feels authentic. It feels like people just trying to like survive a really like totalitarian regime. And it's like, it's so like authentic and earnest. And like, I love it. And yeah, it's sad. Everyone dies. Spoiler, but it's like been out for like 5 years.
If they haven't seen it by now, well.
It's a good death, right? As opposed to like Mace Windu getting lightning down at the window. And they were like, wait, that's it? That's it?
Exactly.
Like what? You couldn't float?
Now, Justine, I hope you're not in charge of the bring Mace Windu crowd back.
I am lobbying. I'm looking when I have enough cred, I can like bring back Mace Windu. I want Mace Windu to come back in like end of season 2 of The Mandalorian as like the gunfighter redeemed, as like an old grizzled Mace Windu. He's been like hiding out in these backwater planets, like keeping people safe from Order 66, like since like and he's just like one eye, and he's like half droid, and he's just like, coming in, and he's like Mace Windu.
Well, listen, Justina, I wouldn't put that past Lucas and Disney to do that, because my brother and I were having this conversation about Darth Maul, and
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, my brother was like, "Hey, Corey, refresh my memory, but 20 years ago, didn't we go see Phantom Menace? And didn't Darth Maul die?" I said, "Yeah, that's the problem. They killed off the best character in like 15 minutes."
And then they gave him spider feet. He was fine.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, maybe one of these days we will see the purple wielding lightsaber Mace Windu come back to us at some point. Let me ask you, Justina, we'll come back to Rogue One, because like your husband, I may take issue with I'll give you some a little bit.
Oh no, Corey, where'd you go? Oh no, we lost Corey. All right, so since Corey has disappeared, oh, wait, is Corey back? I think Corey was a victim of Order 66. Oh, you're muted.
Hello?
Yay, you're back!
I think I know what happened. That was the Sith Lords.
I thought Order 66 got you. I was worried.
Yeah.
Clone Troopers
talking too much about Mace Windu. The Emperor's not having that.
Right.
The Emperor's having that.
The truth about Mace Windu must be known.
Justina, I tell you, you are a kindred spirit. But let me ask you, Justina. I think before the Empire came in and cut our transmission, I wanted to ask you, what was it like going into an area of Star Wars that had never been explored before? We've seen the events of the original trilogy. We've moved past the original trilogy, And we've even had comic books and video games that explore the Knights of the Old Republic.
Mm-hmm.
But the High Republic is brand new, fertile ground. And I'm so stoked and excited for this. I just don't know how to act. So could you tell me, like, what was it like knowing that you would be creating sort of the foundation for this new area of Star Wars?
It was awesome and utterly insane. And probably for the first like few emails, I kept going back to Mike Siglain, who's the head of Disney Lucasfilm Publishing, who oversees all the publishing initiatives. And I was like, "Are you sure you want me? Like, are you sure? like, aren't there like, are you sure?" And yeah, so like, I mean, like, it's not just me. It's it's me, Daniel Jose Older, Claudia Gray. Daniel Jose Older wrote Last Shot, which is Lando and Han adventure. Claudia Gray, who is kind of like probably the pinnacle of Star Wars books. She wrote Lost Stars. She wrote Leia, Princess of Alderaan. She wrote Master and Apprentice most recently. Charles Soule, who's, if you read Marvel comics, the Star Wars comics, he's written probably just about almost all of in just about every single iteration of Star Wars comics, with the exception, I think, of like Dr. Aphra. He's written Star Wars. He's written Darth Vader. He just wrote the Kylo Ren miniseries, and then Kevin Scott, who's also written like a ton of kids books, who's has written Tales from Vader's Castle, which is really fun, like kind of spoopy Star Wars stories, and he's written a lot of comics. They were also part of it, so it was great to have like a team of writers. Of course, we still always have Story Group, who was kind of like the keepers of the canon. They are our kind of our Jocasta News of the group, right?
Nice.
So, and then of course you have your editors. I have Jen and Mike, and then a bunch of our other editors, Robert, who does comics. So it's a big team of people, and they kind of like looked to the five of us and like, okay, so what kind of stories do we want to tell? And it was like, because it's like all your things that you thought as a kid, right? Because we've all, if you're a Star Wars fan, you've always had that moment where you're like with your friends, you're like, what the hell did happen to Mace Windu, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And you're just like, and you go back and forth, and like you get to do that, but like for money, like as a living, and it's like it's pretty exciting. And it's like you get to go away and do like writing books is like what I love to do. It's it's the best worst job I've ever had, and so like to be able to do that and then like bring in Star Wars and be able to do it in a time period where I don't have to worry about all the Jedi dying because of Order 66, right? Like
that's right,
guys, unless I kill you in the story. So it's really cool and it's awesome. And then working with other writers and like seeing what they're doing in their stories, and then pulling those elements into your story, and then like doing that exchange of information. It's really awesome. It's really cool, and I just hope the fans love it as much as we do, because we just have so many stories planned, and as long as like people are supporting the books, we will keep writing them.
That is awesome, Justina. Let me ask you a follow-up question to the High Republic area that you're working in now. With the Sith on the decline at that point, who are some of the quote enemies of the Jedi? Always lurking around. You always have the Mandalorians and things like that. But who are some of the enemies that the Jedi might encounter in the High Republic?
Right. So we have our our spotlight bad guy from the moment. I mean, of course we have the Sith. They're at the rule of two, so there's two of them somewhere. They're hiding it. They are no match for like the thousands of Jedi that exist. And right now we have our bad guys, especially going into the first few books, are the Nihil. And the Nihil are sort of like the worst of the worst. Your kind of space Viking space pirate bad guys. They have no moral code. They don't care about anybody but themselves. Even within their own organization, they're kind of just like this loosey groups, kind of like cells of marauders. And then part of the job of the first story is to introduce them and see how they become unified. And so they are definitely going to be a challenge for the Jedi, and not just because they use hyperspace in like a wonky way, But because the Jedi are at peace. It's a time of peace. No one expects Spanish Inquisition, and nobody expects denial. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of been fun to like say, okay, how do we create a villain who aren't the Sith, who aren't like a totalitarian regime like the First Order or the Empire, and that are still a challenge for the Jedi, that they're going to force them to work in ways that maybe they're not used to, force them to like go back to their value system and say like, how can we best accomplish these goals. And then the Republic right now, the Republic's in an age of expansion, that we're still seeing planets that we know and love coming into the Republic. We're still, the Galactic Senate is not quite as big as we expect when we see it in the prequel trilogy. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's kind of cool to go back and like ask those questions, like, okay, so what would have been, how would it have been to be a Jedi? We have the stories, we have the chronicles of like the wills and things like that. It's like, how do we show you Jedi who are actual people, who are living in the galaxy, who are doing the best they can in a time when they're not on the decline, where we aren't seeing the end of their era. So it's been really cool.
That's really cool. I think one of the things that I've often found interesting, and we'll take a few questions from our chat room in a moment. But one of the things I found very interesting is during a certain era of the Jedi, the colors of the lightsabers actually meant something. We don't really get a chance to see that fleshed out in the movies and TV shows, but there was a point in time where the Jedi were expanded around the galaxy, and the color of your lightsaber was indicative of your role within the Jedi Order.
Yes.
Oh, it was a statement, but I was like, well,
I concur. Yes. Yeah. I mean, you're gonna get to see that. You're also gonna get to see like, one of the things we just did a New York Comic-Con Metaverse panel a little while that aired yesterday. But one of the things about Vernesha Rwoh is she has some modifications to her lightsaber that we haven't seen necessarily recently in any of the movies and such. And so like what's that look like? I'm not going to tell you because I want you to read the book.
Well, actually, I did see some images from some of the new hilts that they have, and it reminds you a little bit of Kylo Ren's kind of hilt, but it's a little more stylish and a little more practical.
Yeah.
And so, so that was pretty cool to see. But Justina, before I take our first question from the audience, I'm sort of reminded of a conversation I had with Dave Filoni. So I met Dave Filoni 12 years ago at Star Wars Breakfast at Comic-Con in San Diego.
Nice.
And he was talking about the fact that Ahsoka and Anakin sort of introduced a brand new generation to the Star Wars universe, similar to how Luke and Leia was our introduction. I have a sneaky suspicion, Justina, that The Mandalorian and the High Republic, those two areas will now be a new introduction going forward. So I'm excited for you personally, because this book is going to introduce an entire new generation to Star Wars. And so I'm excited for all the possibilities it holds for you.
I'm excited for all the fans who haven't yet discovered Star Wars who are going to get a chance to. I think also, we look back at like The Force Awakens, like that series of movies, and brought in a lot of new fans, people who had just been like, kind of casual fans. And I do think that's one of the most exciting things about Star Wars is it is for everybody. And it's such the canon is so broad and so vast that like you can find what you're looking for within the storytelling. And that's one of the things I love about it. If I want to read a romance, I can find that. If I want to read about the bad guys being bad, that exists too, right? And so I do like that there's like a lot of storytelling for fans to kind of, find their own kind of thing they love.
Nice. Now, Justina, I hate to say this, but oh, okay. Well, no, I think when my iPad rebooted, a lot of the questions may have been lost, but I do have one question here. What color would your lightsaber be, from Jonathan?
Oh, purple. I love a purple lightsaber. All purple everything. When I saw Phantom Menace in the theater,
Oh
And
yeah. Oh yeah.
I remember when they first showed Mace Windu, I was so excited that there was a Black Jedi. But then, like, you find out that he has a purple lightsaber, and it's like, yes. Although I don't think we see that until Attack of the Clones. But yeah, but his purple lightsaber for me was like, that was like, yes. And if not purple, then orange. But that makes that's fraught. But that like orange doesn't always mean good things. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I'm almost assuming that Jonathan's question was geared more towards you than it was towards me, but I will just echo those sentiments. I'll just sort of put in a shameless plug. I'm a member of a fraternity whose color is royal purple. And so purple has always been a favorite color of mine. And so to see a purple lightsaber for the first time was like, whoa, that is pretty amazing. And then sort of read the backstory behind who would wield that type of lightsaber and what kind of emotional toll it might take on you and those types of things. You know that Mace Windu has to be a strong person,
yeah,
to wield such a lightsaber. Question is come in from a young Jedi Knight by the name of Travis Holloway, and he wants to know, what advice do you have for aspiring writers?
The advice you don't want to hear, which is just write. There are no shortcuts to writing. It's like running a marathon. It's like, how do I run a marathon? You run like that. You run a lot, and writing the same way. If you're someone who's like still at the beginning of like trying to start writing, I'm actually doing a writing boot camp for newer writers to prepare for NaNo. November is NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, which is a really intense like 30 days where you try to write like 1,500 words a day, maybe a little more, might be more. So you end up with 50,000 words at the end of the month. I feel like 1,500 is not the right number. It might be like 1,500. It just feels like whenever you're in it, it always feels like way more than like 1,500 words. So, and if you plan on doing NaNoWriMo, definitely sign up for my newsletter. It's going to be free. It's just basically some basic writing craft types. We're going to talk about things like setting and character and plot, how they marry up together, how they interplay, how to write an outline for your story, because a lot of times people sit down and start to write and they don't have an outline. And that's fine if you're just like exploratory writing. But if you actually want to write a book, it's helpful to know where you're going. You wouldn't leave the house without a map if you weren't if it wasn't your neighborhood. It's helpful to have an outline. So yeah, so if you look at my Twitter, it's Justina Ireland, it's just my name. The pinned tweet right now is the sign up for that, and we'll start next week. Other than that, definitely there's lots of resources out there on the internet for writers. That's one of the amazing things about the internet is there's so much information, it's all free. But definitely Google like how to write a book, and you will find like a million websites from a million other writers who are just like trying to help you write books. So yeah, so definitely just start writing. You know, take some, if you are a person who likes taking classes, usually your local junior colleges will have creative writing classes, or your local library sometimes have writers groups, and that's a good place to get started as well. But yeah, just sit down and write and just start thinking about story. And definitely Google something like Save the Cat, which is a plot format, or 8-point plot format, so you have an idea of what a plot should look like, because that's, as long as you can outline it, that's like 90% of the work right there.
Awesome. Justine, I had another question coming in from a member of the Rebel Alliance. They were asking, are there any future projects or books that you're working on right now that you can share with us?
Yeah, so right now, my next me book that's coming out is a middle grade that comes out in May called Ophi's Ghosts, and it takes place in 1920s Pittsburgh, and it's about a little girl from Georgia who her family flee Georgia after her father is lynched for voting, which is actually based on a true story that happened in Georgia in the I think 1920s, 1930s. And so they go to Pittsburgh, and after her father is murdered, she realizes that she can see ghosts. And so it's kind of about that, the experience of Black migration, of the Great Migration, of leaving the South and Jim Crow and going to the North, where it was supposed to be free, but still wasn't really free, and how you live in a system that's not built to give you justice, and how you go day by day. while also seeing ghosts. And it's a middle grade book, so it's perfect for, you know, readers 8 and up. And then my next YA is actually going to be a Star Wars YA, which we don't have a title yet, but is the next in the High Republic. So it's going to be a Star Wars High Republic YA book. So with the middle grade, it's usually a shorter read. Usually, if you're an adult, you can usually read it in 3 to 4 hours. A YA book's usually an all-day read. So you'll see some familiar characters from the first wave of books, which is Light of Jedi, Test of Courage, and Into the Dark. I almost forgot what it was. So you'll see some of those characters reoccur in that book. And then my next YA book comes out in 22, which seems like a really long time away, but publishing is slow and writing is hard. And that book, that book right now is called Rusted Magic, and that's the book I talked about. Takes place in the 1930s.
Nice. I'm gonna tell you, Justina, I'll be quite honest with you. I would like to just have a session where we talk just history, period. I mean, like listening to that story about the lynching and going north, it's something that I talk about every semester. And so I just think that we have that kindred spirit of history there. And I really just, unbelievable. I tell you what, Justina, I think we've got a few more minutes before we close out. So let me take another question. When you write, this is from Jedi Master Amanda. When you write, are you a planner, is that a pantser, or both?
I used to be a pantser in my early days, and that was when I didn't know how to write, because I like the exploratory writing. Now I'm mostly a planner. I do a broad outline. I make sure I have all my key scenes like outlined in a synopsis, but then I also do a lot of exploratory writing in that spaces, right, to make sure that the character, the first draft of any book or anything, or even a paper, academic paper, is just you telling yourself the story, right? It's just you telling yourself the information that you want to eventually give to an audience. And it isn't until a second or third draft that it's actually starts to take on that book shape, that story shape, where I'm inviting the audience into reading my words. And so for me, I find that having a good idea of where I'm going takes less time. And when you're like a working writer, you have deadlines. And so you have to know how to budget your time, and that planning helps. So I'm not a planner by nature, because I like to like just kind of like, I'm the person who's like, let's just wander through the neighborhood and see where we end up, even though it's a terrible idea, because that's how you get murdered. But now I plan. Now I write outlines and synopses.
That's good. That's good. I'll circle back around. An earlier question dealt with in crafting the story for the High Republic. Were there any restrictions placed on you guys in terms of what you could and could not touch, canon, things of that nature?
There's always other projects in process. I mean, we all know, like, there's an Obi-Wan show that we're all waiting on. There's a couple other things that are coming up. There's secret things that are like that only like 2 people know about. So there's always things that they're like, maybe not do that. And if they say, maybe not do that, it's because somebody else is already doing it, and you don't want to tell the same story twice, because that's boring. So there's always certain things that you're not going to touch on, but that's no different than a regular book, because every single time I write a book, there's always a couple scenes that come out because they just don't help the narrative. They're just not, they're like nice filler scenes, but they're not pushing the plot forward, so they're unnecessary. So there's always a few things that are like, nope, don't do that, because we have other plans for that. Which is kind of the fun part, because then you're like, yes, I can't wait till that thing comes out.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, listen, Justina, I really hate the fact. I just feel like we're just getting going. But
I know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, just like, is it 12 o'clock already? But I just wanted to see, was there anything else you wanted to maybe say to the audience, a parting shot, anything else? The floor is yours.
Hey, all I have to say is hand shot first. No, definitely, definitely check me out I'm on Twitter most of the time. It's Justina Ireland at Twitter. Whatever the Twitter is, at Justina Ireland. That's how Twitter works. And then you can also, check me out on Goodreads. I log what I'm reading on Goodreads, just because I like to keep track and talk about books. And then always, my website is always fresh and it's always on, and it's justinaireland.com.
Thank you, Justina. And just to remind the audience, Justina's Star Wars books are Lando's Luck, Spark of the Resistance, and the forthcoming book, A Test of Courage, from the High Republic series. And there it is.
And it's a purple lightsaber. You see that, right?
Yes. Yes. You got to go purple.
Gotta go purple.
Listen, I want to thank everyone at home for tuning in. I want to thank the Rebel Alliance commanders, Leah and Aaron, and the rest of the Star Wars Reads committee for all of their hard work. And please continue to enjoy the rest of today's virtual activities. And last, but certainly not least, may the Force be with you always. Thank you.
So that's your sound booth or something?
I podcast in the same area where I draw, so
Okay.
This is drawing and podcasting, everything.
Nice. All right, so I got this. Miss Megan is on. I think Shayla should be coming on. Let me double check. So what years did you kind of like participate?
Say again.
Like in Star Wars Reads Day, what years were you participating? Was it like before 2018?
I did 2016.
Uh-huh.
I think it was 2016, or maybe it was 2018.
Yeah, I think let's see. I guess kind of remember by posters. So Dennis had last year, and then Megan had 2018.
Yeah.
And
wasn't it Sarah before?
Yeah, I can never get her last name. Passetti.
Yeah. She did the year before that. I think the year before that too, right? Do you know, like, what's the schedule like for Saturday? I know I'm going to be working at the library, so I won't be able to kind of like get on, but I'll definitely try to tune into like some of the live stream stuff. But
yeah,
yeah,
I haven't really checked. The schedule should be on the website, and I know there's like I think there's like three guest speakers.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that. And then I just went to the library. I don't know if you were there today.
Oh, okay. Were you at Wallace?
Oh no, over at the main library.
Oh, okay. I work at Freeman.
Okay.
Yeah, I used to work at the downtown, but then I switched jobs. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I met up with Aaron, and then actually signed 175 of the posters.
Oh, nice.
And so those will, I think, either I have to check and see, but either rolled up or put in the bags with the other goodies.
Oh. So how are they doing the posters this year? How are they giving them out since it's not really a physical event?
Yeah, I think prior to 10:30, people can get like in line any of the different libraries, and then they'll hand out bags.
Oh.
And I think it's maybe throughout the day, but I'm gonna probably try to get like one or two for my kids.
Okay.
And then they'll start either Facebook. I think they have Facebook Live.